I have always believed that marriage means standing beside each other when life becomes difficult. That belief stayed with me until one painful day changed everything I thought I knew. I remember opening my eyes after surgery, feeling weak, confused, and hoping to see the one person who had promised he would never leave my side. Instead, I saw an empty chair where my husband should have been. In that quiet moment, something inside me told me that my life was about to change forever. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Tegan Mercer, and before all of this happened, I thought my husband, Kellen, and I had a strong marriage. We both worked hard, shared responsibilities, and talked about growing old together. When my doctor told me I needed surgery, I was scared, but I felt comfort knowing Kellen promised to take care of me until I recovered. He looked me in the eyes and said I would never have to face this alone. I wanted to believe every word. Still, in the days before the operation, something didn't feel right. His mother, Corinne, kept reminding him that her visit had been planned for months and that nothing should interfere with it. Every conversation seemed to end with her expectations instead of my health. I tried to ignore the feeling in my heart, convincing myself everything would work out, but deep down I couldn't shake the fear that I was about to learn where I truly stood in my own marriage. The room felt strangely quiet as I slowly became more awake. I looked around, expecting Kellen to walk through the door at any moment, but only a nurse was there checking my blood pressure. I asked if my husband had stepped out for coffee, hoping he would be back soon. She hesitated before telling me that he had left for the airport because his mother had just landed and needed someone to pick her up. I stared at her, thinking I had misunderstood because Kellen knew I would wake up frightened and in pain. A little later, he called me from his car. He said Corinne had traveled a long way and he couldn't leave her waiting at the airport. He told me he would only be gone for a few hours and asked me to be understanding because she was family. I quietly told him I understood, but the words hurt more than I expected. The rest of the day passed slowly as nurses helped me instead of my husband. When Kellen finally came back, he talked more about his mother's flight and luggage than about how I was feeling. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued. Every plan changed whenever Corinne wanted something. If she wanted to go somewhere, Kellen left. If she needed help, he rushed to her without thinking twice. I kept telling myself that things would return to normal after she settled in, but they never did. As I watched him put her first again and again, I began to feel less like his wife and more like someone whose needs could always wait until later. When I was finally allowed to go home, I hoped I would be able to rest and recover in peace. Instead, it felt like I had walked into someone else's house. Corinne had already decided where everything should go and how every part of the day should be managed. She acted as if she owned the place, and Kellen never questioned a single decision she made. I tried to focus on getting stronger, but she made even the smallest task feel stressful. If I needed extra time to stand or walk, she would sigh loudly and say people recovered much faster when they stopped feeling sorry for themselves. She often told me that I looked perfectly fine and that I was making my recovery sound worse than it really was. Her words hurt almost as much as my physical pain. I waited for Kellen to defend me, but he always agreed with her. He told me Corinne was only trying to motivate me and that I should be grateful she was willing to stay with us. Every time I tried to explain how her comments made me feel, he accused me of creating unnecessary problems. After a while, I stopped speaking because I knew nobody wanted to hear my side. I spent most of my days sitting quietly, wondering how the man who once promised to protect me could ignore what was happening right in front of him. For the first time since we married, I honestly wondered if I had ever been the most important person in his life at all. One afternoon, I started feeling a sharp pain where the surgery had been done. The medicine I needed was on the kitchen counter because I had forgotten to bring it back to the bedroom earlier that morning. I called out for Kellen several times, but no one answered. I called for Corinne too, thinking she might be somewhere else in the house, but everything stayed silent. The pain became stronger, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Holding onto the wall, I slowly made my way toward the kitchen. My legs felt weak, and every step was difficult. Just before reaching the counter, I lost my balance and nearly fell to the floor. I managed to grab the edge of a chair before I hit the ground. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop crying because I realized how close I had come to seriously hurting myself. Almost an hour later, Kellen walked through the front door carrying several shopping bags, while Corinne happily talked about the stores they had visited. He looked surprised to see me sitting on the chair instead of resting in bed. I asked why he wasn't home when he had promised he would stay with me that afternoon. He casually explained that Corinne wanted to shop, and he didn't think they would be gone very long. Hearing those words hurt more than the physical pain. In that moment, I understood that my safety had not been important enough for him to keep his promise. The trust one had placed in my husband completely broke, and my own home no longer felt like a place where I was protected. A few days later, I decided to sort through the stack of bills and insurance papers that had been left on the living room table. I wanted to keep my mind busy instead of thinking about everything that had gone wrong. As I quietly looked through the papers, I heard voices coming from the next room. Corinne did not know I was close enough to hear her. She told Kellen that he should not rush every time I asked for something because, in her words, if she's too comfortable, she'll never appreciate everything we do. I froze. I waited for Kellen to disagree with her, but he stayed silent. That silence hurt more than anything she had said. I continued organizing the papers and noticed several receipts from expensive shopping trips, restaurant meals, and new items bought during Corinne's stay. Then I remembered the medical support pillow and shower chair my doctor had recommended. I had asked Kellen about them more than once, and each time he said we should wait because money was tight. Looking at those receipts, I realized money had never been the real problem. My comfort had simply never been important enough. As I thought about the past few years, many old memories suddenly made sense. Whenever Corinne wanted something, Kellen always found a way to make it happen. Whenever I needed support, there was always an excuse to delay it. I finally understood this was not carelessness or bad timing. It was a pattern that had quietly shaped our marriage from the very beginning, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't there. That evening, I asked Kellen if we could talk without any interruptions. I stayed calm because I still hoped he would finally listen to me. I explained how lonely I had felt since my surgery and how every broken promise had made the pain even worse. I told him I did not want him to stop loving his mother. I only wanted my husband to care for me when I needed him the most. Instead of trying to understand, he became defensive. He said I was putting him in an impossible position and trying to make him choose between his wife and the woman who had raised him. He insisted that Corinne had sacrificed everything for him and that she deserved his support and respect. Before I could answer, Corinne walked into the room. She immediately started crying and said she had never wanted to cause problems in our marriage. She claimed she had only come to help and that she felt unwanted in our home. Kellen rushed to comfort her while I stood there in complete silence. He looked at me with disappointment and asked why I could not be more understanding. In that moment, I realized I had become the villain in my own marriage simply because I asked to be treated with kindness. No matter how honestly I spoke, my feelings were always dismissed while Corinne's emotions became the only ones that mattered. I stopped arguing because I finally understood that nothing I said would change Kellen's mind. As I walked back to my room, I quietly accepted a painful truth. I could not save a marriage where I would always come second. Over the next few weeks, my body became stronger little by little. I could walk without as much pain, and each small improvement reminded me that I was capable of taking care of myself again. Instead of wasting my energy trying to change Kellen's mind, I decided to use that energy to protect my own future. I quietly made an appointment with a family law attorney and explained everything that had happened since my surgery. The attorney listened carefully and told me to gather any financial records that could help explain how our shared money had been used. I began collecting bank statements, credit card bills, and household records whenever I had the chance. I organized everything neatly and kept copies in a safe place where no one would find them. At home, I acted as though nothing had changed. I stayed polite, answered simple questions, and avoided every argument. Kellen seemed relieved that I had stopped bringing up our problems, never realizing I was simply done asking him to become someone he had already shown he was not. Each day I focused on rebuilding my confidence instead of chasing his attention. I started making plans for work, my finances, and a life where I would never have to beg for basic care or respect again. The fear that had followed me for weeks slowly disappeared. For the first time since waking up after surgery, I felt something I had almost forgotten. I finally felt hope. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but I also knew I was strong enough to walk it on my own. When my doctor cleared me to return to work, I felt like I had been given a fresh start. Receiving my first paycheck again reminded me that I could build a stable life on my own. I opened a bank account in my name and followed my attorney's advice to separate my finances legally. A few days later, I signed the lease for a small apartment that was quiet, safe, and close to my job. I did not tell Kellen about any of these plans because everything was already arranged. The same week, I learned that Corinne was planning another long visit and expected to stay with us again. She spoke as though nothing had changed, completely confident that life would continue the way she wanted. Instead, a process server arrived and handed Kellen the divorce papers. His face went pale as he read through the documents. He called my name over and over, asking if this was some kind of mistake. Then he reached the pages showing the records I had carefully gathered. They listed the money spent on unnecessary trips and purchases while my medical needs were ignored. They also showed dates that matched the promises he had failed to keep. For the first time, Kellen could not explain away his choices or blame someone else. Corinne looked just as shocked because neither of them believed I would ever leave. They had always expected me to stay quiet and accept whatever they decided. As they struggled to understand what was happening, I calmly walked away knowing their control over my life had finally come to an end. The divorce process moved forward over the next several weeks. I stayed calm during every meeting because I knew the facts would speak louder than emotions. My attorney presented the records I had collected, including financial documents, appointment schedules, and other evidence that clearly showed what had happened during my recovery. The timeline matched everything I had experienced and left very little room for excuses. There were also statements from people who had cared for me and seen how often I had been left without the support I needed. Several members of Kellen's family attended one of the hearings because they wanted to understand what had really happened. Until then, they had only heard Corinne's version of the story. As the evidence was reviewed, their expressions slowly changed from confidence to disbelief. They realized I had not been selfish or unreasonable. I had simply expected my husband to keep the promises he willingly made. Kellen finally admitted that he had made terrible decisions and asked if we could find a way to fix our marriage. He said he now understood how much pain he had caused and wished he had handled everything differently. I listened without anger, but my decision had already been made. Some mistakes cannot be undone just because someone finally sees the consequences. Corinne tried to defend herself once again, but every claim she made was contradicted by the documented facts. Her influence disappeared because the truth no longer depended on anyone's opinion. For the first time, everyone saw the same reality that I had been living through all along. A few weeks later, the judge signed the final divorce papers, and my marriage officially came to an end. Walking out of the courthouse, I did not feel defeated. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in a very long time. I moved into my apartment completely, arranged it the way I wanted, and slowly built a peaceful routine. My home became a place where I could rest without fear of criticism or disappointment. I focused on my career, spent time with people who truly cared about me, and continued rebuilding my confidence one day at a time. I later heard that Kellen's life had not changed the way he expected. He was still allowing Corinne to control many of his decisions, and the pattern that had damaged our marriage continued. This time, I was no longer part of it. Corinne also had to accept that her actions had pushed away the one person who had sincerely wanted a happy family. Looking back, I finally understood something that had taken me a long time to see. My surgery was never the reason my marriage ended. It simply uncovered the truth that had been hidden beneath years of excuses and silence. Real love should bring comfort during your hardest moments, not leave you feeling forgotten. I no longer blamed myself for asking to be treated with care and respect because those were never unreasonable expectations. Closing that chapter gave me the freedom to start another one. I promised myself that from that day forward, I would never stay in any relationship where I was expected to accept second place when I deserved to be loved as an equal.